Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into something that sounds romantic and adventurous until you actually eat a medieval hunting party. Picture this. It's 4 in the morning, pitch black except for a few sputtering torches, and you're standing in a muddy courtyard surrounded by barking dogs, shouting men, and the overwhelming smell of horse manure mixed with wet wool. Your breath comes out in visible clouds because it's October in 1340s England, and central heating won't be invented for another 6 centuries. You're wearing clothes that are already damp from yesterday's rain. They never fully dried, and your stomach is empty because nobody thought to feed the servants before a hunt. Welcome to your new reality. And spoiler alert, you probably won't make it to lunch. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Are you in Melbourne where it's already tomorrow? Toronto battling a snowstorm? Maybe you're in Phoenix where it's still somehow 80 degrees in the middle of the night? I love seeing how far this little bedtime community reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The courtyard is chaos incarnated. You've been yanked from your straw mattress if you're lucky enough to have one be someone bellowing that the hunting party assembles at dawn, which apparently means when it's still completely dark outside, in medieval terminology. Around you, at least 40 people are trying to organize what can only be described as controlled pandemonium. Horses stamp and snort, their breath adding to the general fog. Dogs, and we're talking about 30 or 40 hunting hounds here, are losing their collective minds with excitement, howling and straining against their leads. Several have already broken free and are running in ecstatic circles, occasionally stopping to fight each other or investigate something disgusting on the ground. You quickly realize there's a very specific hierarchy unfolding before your exhausted eyes, and you are absolutely at the bottom of it. At the center of this organized chaos stands the Lord who's hosting this whole affair. Let's call him Lord Edmund, because half the nobility in medieval England seem to be named Edmund, William, or Henry. He's mounted on a horse that probably cost more than your entire village's annual income, wearing clothing so richly dyed and embroidered that it gleams even in the weak torchlight. His boots alone represent more leather than you'll see in a lifetime. He's laughing, relaxed, probably already a bit drunk from the spiced wine he's been sipping since he woke up in his comfortable bed approximately 15 minutes ago. Near Lord Edmund cluster the other nobles, his sons, a visiting baron, a bishop who apparently sees no conflict between Christian humility and participating in the slaughter of God's creatures, and various knights and gentlemen who've been invited on this expedition. They're all mounted, all dressed in their finest hunting attire, all wearing leather gloves that look soft as butter. Several have actual falcons perched on their wrists, because apparently bringing birds to hunt while you're also bringing dogs to hunt while you're also bringing humans to hunt is just how you show off in the 14th century. The falcons wear tiny leather hoods decorated with feathers and bells, because even the birds need to look fashionable. Then there's the next tier down, the professional huntsman, the master of hounds, the burners who manage the scent hounds, the feuderers who handle the greyhounds. These men actually know what they're doing, which would be reassuring if they weren't all currently shouting contradictory instructions at everyone around them. The master of hounds is a man named Godric who has, at most, 3 teeth remaining in his head and a face that looks like it's been on the losing end of arguments with wildlife for the past 40 years. He's screaming at someone about the limers. Those are the tracking hounds. You'll learn this distinction very quickly, being addled as nuns in a brewery, which is both oddly specific and probably considered hilarious medieval humor. And then there's you, and about 20 other poor souls like you. The beaters, the porters, the dog handlers, the equipment carriers, the general laborers who make the whole show possible while receiving none of the glory and all of the physical abuse. You're holding a wooden staff that someone thrust into your hands with zero explanation. Is it a weapon? A walking stick? Are you supposed to beat bushes with it? Defend yourself from angry wildlife? You have no idea, and nobody's volunteering information. The clothing situation is its own special nightmare. You're wearing what's essentially a rough wool tunic that reaches your knees, wool hose that are already sagging around your ankles, and leather shoes that have roughly the same defensive capability as thick socks. No gloves, those are for people who matter. No hat except maybe a simple cloth cap that does absolutely nothing to keep your ears warm. The wool is itchy beyond belief, and within about 10 minutes of standing in this courtyard, you're already experiencing the medieval paradox, simultaneously freezing and sweating. The exertion of just existing and trying to stay out of everyone's way has you overheating under the wool, but the pre-dawn air is so cold that your fingers are going numb. Someone shoves a horn into another servant's hands and barks at him to blow for assembly, and the poor guy lifts this massive, curved hunting horn to his lips and produces a sound like a dying moose being strangled. The dogs somehow get even more excited, which you didn't think was physically possible. 2 of them start an actual fight, rolling in the mud and tearing at each other until Godric the huntsman wades in and kicks them apart with the kind of casual violence that suggests this is just routine behavior. Here's something nobody tells you about medieval hunting parties. The smell. It's not just unpleasant, it's this overwhelming assault on your senses that layers multiple terrible odors into one unforgettable sensory experience. Wet dog is the baseline, but then you add horse, which is somehow both sweet and musty and pungent all at once. Human sweat from 40 people who bathe maybe once a month if they're fastidious. The torch smoke is acrid and gets in your throat. Someone's brought meat for the dog's reward, and it's already going off in the morning damp. And underneath it all is mud, not clean earth, but medieval courtyard mud that's been churned by hundreds of feet and hooves and mixed with everything those feet and hooves naturally produce. The sky is just barely starting to lighten from pure black to a deep gray when Lord Edmund finally decides everyone's ready to move out. A horn blows properly this time, and the whole mass of people and animals begins flowing toward the castle gate like some kind of medieval migration. You're swept along, still clutching your mysterious wooden staff, trying not to trip over dogs or get stepped on by horses or drop the coiled rope someone also handed you at some point. As you pass through the gate, one of the other servants sidles up next to you. His name is what's short for Walter, and he's got the kind of face that suggests life has beaten him down thoroughly and repeatedly, but he's too stubborn to stay down. "First hunt?" he asks, and you nod. He makes a sound that might be a laugh or might be a cough. "God help you. Try not to get gored, trampled, lost, bitten, or conscripted into the next war party that passes through. And for the love of all saints, stay downwind of Lord Edmund when he's knocked an arrow. Man couldn't hit a barn from inside the barn." This is not reassuring. The procession moves through the village that clusters around the castle walls. It's still so early that most people are just waking up, but faces appear at windows, watching the spectacle pass. Children dart out to run alongside for a few moments before their parents yank them back. A few villagers call out blessings or good wishes, though you notice these are directed exclusively at Lord Edmund and his noble companions, not at you and your fellow sufferers. Beyond the village, the road narrows to a track, and the track eventually dissolves into just the direction we're heading through increasingly dense vegetation. The forest looms ahead, and even in the growing dawn light, it looks dark and uninviting. Medieval forests aren't like the tame, managed woodland parks you might be familiar with. This is old-growth timber, dense and tangled, full of undergrowth that hasn't been cleared because, well, nobody clears undergrowth. That's just how forests exist. The trees are massive oaks and beeches that have been growing for centuries, their branches creating a canopy so thick that even in leafless winter, the interior of the forest remains dim. You're about to enter that darkness with 40 other people, 40 dogs, and a group of nobles who view this entire experience as entertainment. The weapons are real. The animals you're hunting are dangerous. The medieval understanding of workplace safety is try not to die, and if you do, at least do it quietly so you don't disturb the nobles. Historians still argue whether medieval hunting was primarily about food procurement, social bonding, military training, or just entertainment for the aristocracy. The answer is probably all of the above. But right now, clutching your wooden staff as the forest shadows swallow the morning light, you're starting to suspect the real purpose is to remind people like you exactly where you stand in the social hierarchy, which is to say, directly in harm's way. What leans over again as you enter the treeline? Word of advice. He mutters. When the boar charges, and it will charge climb a tree, don't try to be a hero. Heroes get buried. Cowards get to go home. The dogs surge forward, pulling their handlers with them. The nobles laugh at something you can't hear. Branches close in overhead, blocking out what little light the dawn was providing. Your day has officially begun, and it's only going to get worse from here. The forest swallows the hunting party whole, and within minutes you understand your actual role here. You are a beast of burden who can occasionally follow instructions. While Lord Edmund and his noble companions ride ahead on their magnificent horses, sitting comfortably in their expensive saddles with their falcons and their embroidered gloves, you're on foot. Obviously, peasants walk. That's what peasants do. The fact that you'll be walking for the next 8 to 12 hours, yes. Medieval hunts routinely lasted from dawn until well past dark apparently doesn't warrant any special consideration like, say, comfortable footwear or a heads up about what you're actually supposed to be doing. Godric the huntsman appears at your elbow like a grizzled nightmare. You, he says, jabbing a finger at your chest. You're on the limers. See those 3 hounds there? He points at a trio of dogs that look slightly calmer than their brethren, though calmer is relative when discussing animals that are still vibrating with barely contained hunting instinct. Those are Bellman, Beaumont, and Holdfast. They're tracking hounds. Your job is to keep them on the leash until we find the quarry's lair. Then release them on command. Not before. Not after. On command. Do you understand? You nod because what else are you going to do? Admit that you've never handled a hunting dog in your life? Explain that the only dogs you're familiar with are the half-starved village mutts that hang around hoping for scraps? Godric is already walking away, shouting at someone else about the condition of their horn or their attitude or both. The limers' leashes are thrust into your hands. The leather is worn smooth by years of use, and the moment you take hold of them, all 3 dogs lunge forward simultaneously, nearly yanking your arms from their sockets. Bellman, at least you think it's Bellman, turns his massive head to look at you with what can only be described as contempt. He's a scent hound, bred for generations to track deer and boar, and he can probably smell your fear mixed with your incompetence. His expression says, I'm going to make this as difficult as possible for you, human. What appears beside you again, handling his own set of dogs with practiced ease. Lean back, he advises. Keep the leashes short. They'll respect you more if you're firm. Well, they won't actually respect you, the dogs, but they'll at least stop dragging you through every thorn bush between here and the next county. You try to follow his advice, shortening your grip on the leashes and planting your feet more firmly. This works for approximately 30 seconds before Beaumont spots something: a rabbit, a squirrel, a particularly interesting smell, and bolts sideways, taking you and the other 2 dogs with him. You stumble over a root that seems to have specifically positioned itself to trip you, nearly go down in a patch of mud, and somehow manage to keep your feet through sheer panic-fueled determination. From somewhere up ahead, you hear laughter. The nobles have witnessed your graceless struggle, and they find it delightful. Entertainment before the actual entertainment. You are the opening act, the comic relief, the reminder of why they're so glad they were born into families that own land instead of families that work it. The hunting party spreads out through the forest in a formation that probably makes sense to people who do this regularly but looks like random chaos to you. The nobles remain mounted where the terrain allows it, following the wider paths that wind between the ancient trees. The professional huntsmen move with purpose, reading signs in the undergrowth that you can't see: broken twigs, disturbed leaves, tracks in soft earth, maybe the disrupted pattern of dew on spider webs for all you know. And then there are the servants, spread out in a loose perimeter, doing the actual work of beating bushes, handling dogs, carrying equipment, and generally making sure the nobles can enjoy their sport without any actual discomfort. Your arms are already aching. The limers are strong, probably 60 or 70 pounds each, of pure muscle and single-minded determination. They pull constantly, testing the leashes, testing your strength, testing your resolve. Every time you shift your grip, the leather bites into your palms. You're not wearing gloves. Remember, those are for people who matter. Your hands are going to be raw and blistered by midday, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it except endure. The forest floor is an obstacle course designed by nature to punish human feet. Roots snake across the path, not just small roots you can step over, but massive ones that rise 6 inches or more, gnarled and twisted like frozen wooden serpents. Rocks hide under layers of dead leaves, waiting to turn your ankle. Thorn bushes reach out with what feels like malicious intent, snagging your rough wool clothing and occasionally your skin. You're moving through a landscape that doesn't care about you, following dogs that don't respect you, serving nobles who don't see you as fully human. Here's a fun fact that really drives home the medieval social hierarchy. There were actual laws about who could hunt what and where. The forest laws, established by William the Conqueror and enthusiastically enforced by his successors, designated huge swaths of England as royal forest, which didn't mean it was all trees, just that it was land reserved for the king's hunting pleasure. If you, peasant, were caught hunting deer in the king's forest, you could be blinded, castrated, or hanged. Even killing a rabbit could result in brutal punishment. The deer, the boar, the game birds, all of it belonged to the aristocracy by divine right. Apparently, meanwhile, these same nobles could hunt wherever they pleased, including through the crop fields that you depended on for survival, trampling your wheat and barley because chasing a stag is more important than your family eating this winter. But here's the quirky bit that historians love to point out. Poaching was absolutely rampant. The laws were harsh, but the forests were vast and the enforcers were few. Peasants risked life and limb to hunt illegally because, well, hunger is a powerful motivator. There's something darkly funny about the fact that you could be executed for killing a deer to feed your starving children. But right now you're being forced to help nobles kill that same deer for fun. Medieval logic at its finest. The dogs suddenly tense, their entire bodies going rigid. Bellman's nose is working overtime, his whole head moving in subtle patterns as he processes scents you can't even imagine. Beaumont whines, a high-pitched sound of barely restrained excitement. Holdfast, largest of the 3, starts pulling so hard you have to wrap the leash around your forearm to keep from losing him. Godric materializes out of the undergrowth. They've got something, he hisses. Hold them steady. Don't let them give voice yet. This, you will learn, is the terminology dogs give voice when they bark or howl on the scent. Right now, the limers are supposed to track silently until they locate the quarry's resting place. Holding them steady is like trying to restrain 3 small horses that have suddenly decided they need to be somewhere else immediately. Your feet slide in the leaf litter. Your shoulders burn. The leather leash wrapped around your forearm is cutting off your circulation, and your hand is turning an alarming shade of purple-red. But if you loosen it, you'll lose the dogs entirely. The nobles have gone quiet, sensing the shift in energy. Lord Edmund urges his horse forward, moving with the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having to worry about consequences. If his horse steps on your foot, that's your problem. If you drop the leashes and ruin the hunt, that's also your problem and will likely result in a beating or worse. One of the other servants, a boy who can't be more than 12 or 13, is carrying what looks like a small arsenal on his back. Spare spears, coils of rope, a horn, leather bags whose contents you can only guess at, and what might be folding nets. He's staggering under the weight, his thin frame not really adequate for the load. But nobody cares. He's portable storage, a human pack horse, and if he complains or falters, he'll be replaced by someone more willing to suffer in silence. The hierarchy isn't just about who rides and who walks. It's embedded in every tiny interaction. When Lord Edmund wants wine, someone hands him a flask. When you're thirsty, you drink from streams if you're lucky enough to find them, and you hope the water doesn't make you sick, though it probably will, because medieval water quality is roughly equivalent to modern, definitely don't drink this. When a noble needs to relieve himself, the party pauses and everyone politely looks away. When you need to do the same, you'd better hold it until you can sneak away for 30 seconds without being noticed, and even then you're risking punishment for abandoning your post. Historians still argue whether the medieval period was as brutally hierarchical as popular culture suggests, or if there was more social mobility and mutual obligation than we typically imagine. The answer probably varies by region, time period, and specific circumstances. But right now, with your arms screaming in pain and your stomach empty and your face scratched by thorns while Lord Edmund sits comfortable and warm on his expensive horse, the brutality feels pretty definitive. The limers have led you to a dense thicket of undergrowth near a small stream. Godric moves forward with surprising stealth for a man of his age and build, examining the ground, the broken branches, the disturbed earth. He bends down, touches something you can't see, brings his fingers to his nose, and nods. Boar. He announces quietly, "Big one, bedded down in there." He gestures at the thicket, which looks impenetrably a wall of thorns and twisted branches and shadows. Lord Edmund's face lights up like a child's on Christmas morning, if Christmas morning involved planning the violent death of a large animal. "Excellent. Godric, prepare the relay. We'll rouse him and run him to ground." He turns to his companions. "Gentlemen, ready your spears. This will be magnificent sport." You, meanwhile, are trying to control 3 dogs that have now located their target and want nothing more than to charge into that thicket and start the fight immediately. Bellman is actually growling, a low rumble that you can feel through the leash. Beaumont is whining continuously, his whole body quivering. Holdfast has started to howl, giving voice despite Godric's earlier command, and you can't shut him up because you're not a dog whisperer. You're just a random peasant who got conscripted into this nightmare. "Silence that hound." Godric snaps at you, and you want to ask how, exactly, but you value your continued existence. So you try yanking on the leash and hissing "quiet," which accomplishes absolutely nothing. Holdfast continues howling, his voice echoing through the forest. And now other hounds are joining in, the whole pack taking up the call. Godric throws up his hands. "Fine. Release them. Turn them in." You fumble with the leather straps that hold the leashes together, your numb fingers struggling with knots that were tied by someone who actually knew what they were doing. Finally, Finalia get them loose, and the 3 limers explode forward like furry missiles, disappearing into the thicket with single-minded purpose. For about 5 seconds, there's silence. Then the forest erupts in chaos. The boar comes out of that thicket like he's been shot from a cannon, and your first thought is, that is not an animal, that is a monster. He's massive, easily 300 pounds of muscle, bristle, and rage. His tusks curve up from his lower jaw like twin daggers, yellowed and sharp and already stained with what might be blood from a previous encounter. His eyes are small and mean and locked onto the nearest target. which happens to be you. The lemurs are on him immediately, biting at his hindquarters, his flanks, anywhere they can reach, but he barely seems to notice. He's focused on escape, on survival, on making someone pay for disturbing his rest. He charges forward, and every human in his path scatters like leaves in a storm. You dive sideways, slamming into a tree hard enough to knock the breath from your lungs. The boar thunders past, close enough that you can smell hema musky, wild odor mixed with the metallic tang of blood. The ground actually shakes with his passage. Or maybe that's just your perception because your heart is trying to escape your chest through your ribcage. The mounted nobles are shouting, spurring their horses after the boar. The rest of the hunting party is in full pursuit, dogs streaming forward in a baying wave, huntsmen running with spears ready, servants scrambling to keep up or get out of the way, or both simultaneously. You pull yourself up from the base of the tree, gasping for air, and see what already running past. Move, he yells back at you. If you lose sight of the party, you'll never find your way out. He's right. The forest all looks the same: endless trees, endless undergrowth, endless ways to get completely lost. You force your protesting legs to move, breaking into a run, following the sounds of the hunt as it crashes through the woodland like a mobile disaster. Your role, you're realizing, is to be everywhere and nowhere, to be available when needed but invisible when not, to anticipate demands that nobody will actually communicate to you, to survive the day without getting killed, maimed, or lost, and to do it all without complaint, without recognition, without even basic human consideration. Welcome to the medieval working class. The sport is about to get even worse. The forest has stopped being picturesque scenery and transformed into an active threat trying to kill you through 1,000 small cuts and one major disorientation. You're running now, actually running through terrain that wasn't designed for running, following sounds that keep changing direction, trying desperately not to lose sight of the hunting party while simultaneously trying not to impale yourself on the approximately 8 million sharp objects that medieval forests seem to generate spontaneously. The boar has led everyone on a chase that winds through the densest parts of the woodland, because of course he has. Boars aren't stupid theory, actually remarkably intelligent animals, which is why they've survived in European forests for thousands of years despite humans' best efforts to kill them all. This particular boar seems to have a PhD in evasion tactics. He's taking the party through thorn bushes that tear at your clothes and skin, over streams that are just deep enough to soak your feet and make your already questionable shoes completely useless, and under low-hanging branches that seem specifically positioned at face height for people your size while passing harmlessly over the heads of the mounted nobles. You vault over a fallen log. Your foot lands on moss-covered stone, and you immediately go down in a tangle of limbs and dignity. The moss is slippery as ice, and the stone it covers is part of some ancient structure, maybe a wall from a long-abandoned settlement, maybe a boundary marker, maybe just a rock that happens to be conveniently placed to trip running idiots. Your knee hits first, sending a spike of pain up your leg. Then your hands slam into the forest floor, which is fortunately soft leaf litter rather than more stone. You scramble up immediately because stopping is not an option. Lose the party and you're genuinely lost, possibly until you die of exposure or get eaten by wolves or wander in circles until you expire from exhaustion. The sounds of the hunt are already fainter. Dog voices echoing between trees lose their directionality, bouncing off trunks and rocks until you can't tell if they're ahead of you, to the left, or somehow behind you. Panic starts creeping in that cold, clutching sensation in your chest that says you've made a terrible mistake and you're about to pay for it. Medieval forests aren't like modern nature preserves with marked trails and helpful signs. This is thousands of acres of unmarked wilderness where people absolutely do get lost and die, where your corpse might not be found until hunters stumble across your bones next season. You force yourself to stop, to actually listen rather than just crashing forward blindly. They're to your right, the sound of a horn. That's the hunting party signaling something to each other. You adjust your course and push forward, ignoring the burning in your lungs and the way your soaked feet are already developing blisters inside your medieval leather shoes, which have roughly the same supportive structure as damp cardboard. Breaking through a curtain of hanging branches, you stumble back into the wake of the main party. What glances back, sees you, and nods the closest thing to "glad you didn't die" you're likely to get. The other servants are scattered through the forest in a loose formation, some carrying equipment, some managing dogs that weren't part of the initial chase, some apparently just existing in a state of perpetual readiness to be needed for something. The young boy you noticed earlier, the one carrying the arsenal on his back, has somehow lost half his load. A coil of rope is missing, one of the spears is gone, and he looks like he's about to cry but knows crying will only make things worse. Godric will probably beat him later for losing equipment. That's just how it works. The boy's suffering is a given, built into the system, unremarkable. Here's something nobody warns you about medieval forests. They're not empty. Modern people think of wilderness as places where humans don't go. But medieval forests were actually hives of activity, just not the kind of activity that ever made it into noble chronicles or official records. Charcoal burners working in temporary camps, their faces perpetually blackened by soot. Swineherds bringing pigs to forage on acorns and beech nuts. Outlaws and criminals hiding from justice. Hermits seeking isolation. Travelers using the forest paths as shortcuts. People gathering wood, hunting illegally, foraging for food, or just living their lives in the marginal spaces between official settlements. As the hunting party crashes through the undergrowth, you catch glimpses of these other forest inhabitants. A charcoal burner's temporary shelter, barely more than a lean-to made of branches, sits abandoned, its occupant having fled at the sound of approaching nobles. Smart move. The last thing you want is to accidentally get between Lord Edmund and his prey. Nobles on the hunt have been known to ride right through peasant settlements, trampling gardens and scattering livestock, because the chase is more important than your livelihood. There's also the perpetual danger of bandits. Medieval forests weren't romantic hideouts for noble outlaws like the Robin Hood myth suggests. They were dangerous territories where desperate people did desperate things. A hunting party like this one, full of nobles wearing expensive clothes and carrying valuable weapons, would be a tempting target if not for the sheer number of armed men involved. Even so, you're constantly scanning the shadows between trees, watching for movement that might indicate someone watching, waiting, calculating whether the risk is worth the reward. The terrain keeps getting worse. You're climbing now, following the party up a slope that seems to get steeper with every step. Your calves are burning, your breath coming in ragged gasps, and you're starting to understand why medieval people were generally much shorter than modern humans. Natural selection favored those who could navigate this terrain efficiently, and being 5'6" with a low center of gravity is actually an advantage when you're scrambling up a muddy hillside in the half-dark of a forest canopy. At the crest of the hill, you pause for just a moment, not because you want to, but because your body simply refuses to continue without at least 5 seconds of rest. From this vantage point, you can actually see the scope of the forest stretching out in all directions. It's vast. Genuinely, intimidatingly vast. Thousands upon thousands of acres of old-growth timber, broken only occasionally by clearings or the silver thread of a stream catching what little light penetrates the canopy. No roads visible from here. No villages. No landmarks you could use to orient yourself. Just trees, in every direction, to the horizon and beyond. This is what medieval Europe actually looked like, not the tame, managed countryside of later centuries, but a landscape still dominated by wilderness. Historians estimate that forests covered something like 30 to 40% of Europe during the medieval period, and these weren't the neat, organized forests you might imagine. These were wild places, dangerous places, places where the boundary between civilization and chaos was always thin and frequently crossed. The hunt is moving again, descending the far side of the hill, and you force your legs to cooperate. Going downhill is somehow worse than going up, constantly fighting gravity. Your momentum trying to send you tumbling forward, and your questionable footwear provides absolutely zero traction on the loose leaves and mud. You half run, half slide down the slope, grabbing at trees to slow yourself, leaving skin behind on rough bark, accumulating more scratches and bruises to add to your growing collection. A stream appears at the bottom of the hill, not a cute babbling brook, but a legitimate stream, maybe 15 feet across and flowing fast with recent rain. The nobles and their horses splash across with minimal difficulty, the water rising to the horses' knees but no higher. The professional huntsmen wade through, holding their weapons and equipment above their heads. And then there's you and the other servants, who get to discover that the stream is actually deeper than it looks, and colder, and the current is stronger than you expected. You step in and immediately the water is over your knees, soaking your wool hose, filling your shoes. The cold is shocking, not just cold, but that special kind of autumn water cold that feels like it's actively stealing heat from your body. The current pushes at you, not strong enough to sweep you away, but definitely strong enough to make every step an effort. The stones on the stream bed are slippery, rounded smooth by centuries of water flow, and each step is a gamble that you won't lose your footing and end up completely submerged. Halfway across, your foot finds a gap between stones, twists, and you go down on one knee with a splash that soaks you to the waist. The water rushes into your clothes, and the wool already heavy when just damp becomes impossibly sodden. You push yourself up, slogging forward, knowing that you'll be carrying this extra water weight for the rest of the day because your clothes will never fully dry in the forest humidity. Who somehow made it across without incident, offers you a hand up the far bank. Getting tired yet? He asks, and there's something in his tone, not quite mockery, but definitely amusement at your suffering. This is his entertainment, watching newcomers discover exactly how brutal a hunting party can be. We've been at this for maybe 2 hours. You gasp, water streaming from your clothes, creating puddles around your feet. 2 hours. What agrees? We've got 10 more ahead of us. 12 if Lord Edmund really gets into the spirit of things. Hope you ate a good breakfast. You didn't eat any breakfast. Nobody fed you breakfast. The servants don't get to eat until the nobles have finished their meal, and the nobles were too excited about the hunt to sit through a proper breakfast. So they grabbed some bread and cheese and mounted up, leaving you and everyone else at your social level to make do with nothing. The boar has gone to ground somewhere ahead. You can hear the change in the dog's voices, theory, no longer running and baying, but circling and barking, the sound that means they've cornered the quarry. The party is converging on that location, moving through a section of forest where the undergrowth is particularly dense. Hawthorn bushes, their branches studded with thorns like natural barbed wire, form walls that channel movement into narrow passages. Brambles reach out to snag anything that passes. And there's ivy everywhere, not the decorative ivy you might see on buildings, but thick, ancient ivy with stems as thick as your wrist, hanging from trees and covering the ground and generally making movement even more difficult. You're pushing through a curtain of this ivy when something drops onto your shoulder. Your first thought is spider, which is bad enough, but then the thing moves and you realize it's not a spider, it's a leech. A fat, black leech that's already attached itself to the exposed skin of your neck, having dropped from the ivy overhead where it was waiting for a warm-blooded creature to pass beneath. Leeches were actually used in medieval medicine. This was the era of bloodletting and the theory of humors, where doctors thought that removing excess blood could cure everything from headaches to plague. But there's a significant difference between a physician's medicinal leech, raised in controlled conditions and applied with some degree of precision, and a wild forest leech that's been hanging out in damp vegetation waiting to feed on whatever passes by. This leech is not trying to heal you. This leech is just hungry. You try to brush it off, but it's already attached, the sucker firmly fixed to your skin. What sees your struggle and sighs? Don't pull it, he advises. You'll leave the head in and it'll fester. Here. He produces a small knife from his belt because of course he has a knife. You're probably the only person in this entire hunting party who doesn't have a knife and uses the blade to gently lever the leech off your neck. Comes away with a wet sucking sound, and you can feel blood running down your neck from where it was feeding. Press on it. What says? Already moving on. It'll stop bleeding in a minute. It doesn't stop bleeding in a minute. Leech bites bleed for ages because leeches inject an anticoagulant to keep the blood flowing while they feed. You're going to have blood slowly seeping down your neck for the next hour, soaking into your already filthy, wet collar, attracting flies and adding one more layer of misery to your day. The party has gathered in a clearing where the boar has made his stand. He's backed up against a massive fallen oak, using the log as protection for his rear while facing the semicircle of dogs and humans arrayed before him. He's bleeding from multiple wounds bites from the dogs. Maybe a spear thrust that grazed him, but he's still very much alive and very much dangerous. His eyes are fixed on the crowd before him, and he's making this low, rumbling sound that's somehow more terrifying than any roar or growl. It's the sound of an animal that knows it's going to die but intends to take some enemies with it. Lord Edmund is dismounting, handing his reins to a servant, accepting a boar spear from another. The spear is a serious piece of equipment, maybe 8 feet long with a broad, leaf-shaped blade and a crossguard behind the blade to prevent a charging boar from running up the shaft and goring the holder. This is not a sport for the faint of heart. Boar hunting is genuinely dangerous, and nobles absolutely did die doing this, gored by tusks or trampled in the chaos. But here's the thing: Lord Edmund gets to choose his moment. He gets to stand at a safe distance, spear ready, while the dogs and beaters do the work of tiring the boar, weakening it, making it manageable. And if things go wrong, there are 20 other people here to step in, to take the hit, to die in his place if necessary. You, on the other hand, are standing in the second rank with your wooden staff, expected to, what, exactly? Help somehow? Look useful? Provide additional targets for an angry boar to charge at? Your role is becoming clearer. You're not here to hunt. You're here to be disposable backup, the expendable cushion between danger and people who matter. The boar lowers his head, those tusks catching the filtered forest light, and the sound he makes rises in pitch challenge. A warning, promise of violence. This, you're realizing, is the forest gauntlet. Every step is a test. Every moment holds potential disaster, and you're only a few hours in. The boar spear in Lord Edmund's hands is a work of art-polished ash shaft, gleaming steel blade, leather grip wrapped in intricate patterns. It's also completely off-limits to you. You're standing maybe 10 feet away, clutching your wooden staff like it's going to somehow save you when 300 pounds of angry pig decides to charge. And you're acutely aware that the weapon disparity here is less about practicality and more about social control. The nobles have the good weapons. The professionals have the adequate weapons. And you have a stick. Let's talk about medieval weaponry and the very deliberate way it was distributed along class lines. Crossbows, for instance, were absolutely devastating weapons, so effective that the Pope actually tried to ban their use in 1139 through the Second Lateran Council, declaring them too lethal for Christians to use against each other. The ban didn't stick, obviously, but the attempt tells you something about how dangerous these weapons were. A crossbow could punch through chainmail, could be used effectively by someone with minimal training, and most importantly, it democratized violence in a way that terrified the aristocracy. A peasant with a crossbow could kill a knight, and that threatened the entire social order. So crossbows were restricted. Not banned outright, that would be impractical, but carefully controlled. You needed permission to own one. You needed to be part of the military levy or a professional huntsman or otherwise officially sanctioned to carry one. And right now, you can see two crossbowmen in Lord Edmund's party. Both of them professional huntsmen. Both of them positioned well away from the common servants. Their weapons loaded and ready, but absolutely not available for you to touch. The longbows are even more interesting. England would eventually become famous for its longbowmen archers, who'd devastate French cavalry at Crécy and Agincourt, but that tradition required years of training. You didn't just pick up a longbow and start shooting. The draw weight on a military longbow was upwards of 150 pounds, requiring tremendous upper body strength and technique developed over years of practice. There are actually skeletal remains of medieval archers that show distinctive bone deformities from the repetitive stress of drawing those bows. Their left arms are thicker than their right. Their spines show specific patterns of stress, and their shoulder joints are enlarged and modified by decades of use. Several of the nobles have brought bows, lighter hunting versions rather than the military monsters, but still requiring significant skill and strength to use effectively. Their compound weapons, longbows backed with layers of horn or sinew to increase their power, and they cost more than you'd earn in several years of labor. One of Lord Edmund's sons is nocking an arrow right now, drawing back the string with practiced ease, and you notice his fingers are protected by a leather shooting glove. Of course they are. Can't have the nobles developing calluses. And then there are the spears. Not the boar spears that the nobles carry, those specialized, well-balanced weapons with their protective crossguards, but the simpler spears available to the professional huntsman. These are still quality weapons, iron-tipped and properly balanced, capable of serious damage. But you don't get one of those either. Your wooden staff is basically a glorified walking stick, suitable for maybe beating bushes or prodding undergrowth or defending yourself from an angry rabbit. Against a boar? You might as well threaten him with harsh language. Historians still argue whether medieval weapon restrictions were primarily about military control or social control. The official reason was always about preventing rebellion and maintaining order. Can't have the peasants armed and dangerous. But there's also an element of pure class distinction. The sword, for instance, was the symbol of knighthood and nobility. Peasants weren't forbidden from having swords because swords were especially dangerous. They weren't really compared to other weapons, but because allowing peasants to carry swords would blur the visible markers of social status. A noble could glance at someone and know their place in the hierarchy based on what weapons they carried. The boar is making his calculations, his small eyes tracking movement in the semicircle of hunters and dogs arrayed before him. He's bleeding from multiple wounds, but boars are incredibly tough animals, thick skin, thicker layer of fat, and a pain tolerance that seems almost supernatural. There are accounts of boars continuing to fight with spears completely through their bodies, with fatal wounds that would drop most animals instantly. This one is hurt but far from finished. One of the Limercia think it's Beaumont, but honestly they all look similar when they're covered in mud and blood gets too close. The boar's head snaps around with shocking speed, and those tusks catch the dog in the shoulder. Beaumont yelps and scrambles backward, blood streaming from the gash. The other dogs surge forward, barking frantically, but they're more cautious now. They've learned respect. Hold! Godric shouts, and the professional huntsmen freeze, spears ready but not advancing. This is the noble's moment, the part where Lord Edmund gets to demonstrate his courage and skill by facing the boar. It's theater, really dangerous theater, but theater nonetheless. The whole hunting party has worked for hours to create this scene, to position the prey exactly where the noble wants it, weakened enough to be manageable but not so weakened that the kill lacks drama. Lord Edmund advances, spear lowered, his expensive boots squelching in the mud. His technique is actually pretty good, you have to give him that. He knows how to move, how to keep the spear point between himself and the boar, how to stay balanced. This isn't his first hunt. He's been training for this his entire life, the same way you've been training your entire life to. Work, just work. Generic, unrewarding, endless work. The boar charges, not at Lord Edmund, because that would be too convenient at the young servant boy with the depleted arsenal on his back. The boy freezes, his eyes going wide with terror, and the boar is closing the distance impossibly fast. And you watch this happen in the stretched out time that extreme situations create. The boy is going to die. He's going to get gored by those tusks, and he's maybe 13 years old, and nobody's moving fast enough to stop it. Except what lunges forward with his spear, not a fancy boar spear, just a hunting spear with a simple iron tip, and jabs it at the boar's face. Not a killing blow, just a distraction. A look over here instead, poke that redirects the boar's attention for just a second. The boy stumbles backward, trips over his own feet, and falls in a crash of equipment. The boar pivots toward who's already backing up, keeping his spear between himself and the animal. Now the other huntsmen move in, a coordinated effort to contain the boar, to drive it back toward Lord Edmund's position. Their spears jab and thrust, not trying to kill, that's the noble's privilege, but harassing, controlling, turning the boar like drovers moving cattle. The boar is spinning, trying to face multiple threats at once, bleeding more freely now, and you can see his strength fading. Not gone, but fading. He's been running for hours, fighting for the last 30 minutes, bleeding from a dozen wounds. Even his supernatural toughness has limits. Lord Edmund sees his opportunity. He moves in, spear raised, and drives the blade into the boar's shoulder, behind the front leg, angling toward the heart. It's a good thrust, technically proficient, and the boar screams an awful, almost human sound that echoes through the forest. But he's not dead. The spear has struck true. But boars are tough. Remember? He wrenches sideways, and Lord Edmund has to release the spear or be pulled off balance. The boar stumbles, the spear shaft protruding from his shoulder, and then he does something that makes your blood freeze. He charges again, directly at you this time. You have approximately 1 second to make a decision. Your wooden staff is useless, you know this intellectually, even though your hands grip it tighter anyway. The nearest tree is maybe 6 feet to your left. What's earlier advice echoes in your memory. When the boar charges, and it will charge, climb a tree. You drop the staff and jump for the tree, grabbing at the lowest branch, which is about 7 feet off the ground, because of course it is. Your fingers catch bark, rough and solid, and you haul yourself up with the kind of desperate strength that comes from knowing that death is literally seconds behind you. Your feet scramble against the trunk, finding purchase, and you pull yourself up just as the boar reaches the base of the tree. He slams into the trunk with enough force to shake the entire tree. You're maybe 8 feet up now, straddling a branch, and you can look down at the boar directly below you. He's trying to figure out where you went, his head swinging back and forth, blood streaming from his wounds and spattering the ground. The spear in his shoulder bobs with each movement. He's dying, but he's not dead, and for a few more minutes he's still the most dangerous thing in this forest. Lord Edmund approaches from behind, having retrieved another spear from one of the servants. This time he's more careful, waiting for the boar to be distracted. One of the huntsmen throws a stone that bounces off the boar's hindquarters, making him spin around, and Edmund strikes again, another thrust, this one to the neck, severing something vital. Blood fountains out, bright arterial red, and the boar's legs finally give out. He collapses, his breathing becoming labored, rattling, and then after what feels like an eternity but is probably only a minute, he goes still. The forest erupts in celebration. Horns blow. The nobles are congratulating each other and Lord Edmund on a magnificent kill. The dogs are finally released to worry at the corpse, which is apparently their reward for the hours of work. And you're still in the tree, your heart hammering, your hands shaking so badly you're not sure you can climb down safely. You can come down now. What calls up to you? And there's definitely amusement in his voice. He's dead. Probably. You manage to get down without falling, though it's not graceful. Your legs are trembling, your hands scraped raw from the bark. The leech bite on your neck has finally stopped bleeding, but now you've got tree sap in your hair and on your clothes, adding one more layer of filth to your deteriorating appearance. The boar is massive up close. 300 pounds easily, maybe more. His tusks are yellowed and chipped from years of use, and there's gray in the bristles around his snout. He was old, experienced, and he still almost killed several people in his final minutes. This is what medieval hunting was, not sport in the modern sense, but actual combat between humans and dangerous animals. Now comes the part nobody talks about in the romantic tales of noble hunts: the butchering. The boar needs to be field-dressed immediately, or the meat will spoil. This is skilled work, requiring knowledge of anatomy and sharp knives and strong stomachs. The professional huntsmen handle most of it, but guess who gets to do the grunt work? That's right, you and your fellow servants. You're handed a rope and told to help drag the carcass to a flatter area where the butchering can proceed more easily. The boar is dead weight literally, and even with 4 of you pulling, it's exhausting work. The body slides over logs and rocks, leaving a trail of blood and disturbed earth. Your hands are already blistered from the dog's leashes earlier, and now you're adding rope burns to the collection. The actual butchering is fascinating in a grotesque way. The master huntsman makes the first cuts with practiced precision, opening the body cavity, removing the organs. The heart and liver are set aside. Those are delicacies that will go to Lord Edmund's table. The intestines are pulled out in loops, steaming in the cool air, and dumped in a pile for the dogs, who fall on them enthusiastically. The smell is overwhelming: blood and bile and the contents of the digestive system mixing together in an odor that seems to coat the inside of your nose. You're given the job of holding a leather bag open while bloody organs are deposited into it. Your hands are slick with blood up to the wrists. Flies are already gathering, drawn by the smell. The nobles have withdrawn upwind, breaking out wine and bread, celebrating the kill while the actual work happens downwind where they don't have to see or smell it. This is medieval hunting, not the glorious sport of poems and songs, but a combination of violence, exhaustion, hierarchy, and blood. You've survived the boar, but you're already dreading what comes next because the day is far from over, and there are more animals to hunt, more miles to walk, more ways for things to go catastrophically wrong. And you still don't have a real weapon, just in case you'd forgotten. The celebration around the dead boar is brief, maybe 15 minutes of nobles congratulating themselves, passing around wineskins, and gnawing on bread and cheese that someone produced from saddlebags. You watch this feast happen from 10 feet away, your stomach clenching with hunger, your mouth watering at the smell of the bread even though it's mixed with the smell of boar guts and blood and everything else wrong with this situation. Nobody offers you food. Nobody offers you wine. You're still holding the leather bag full of bloody organs. And your role right now is apparently to be a mobile container, not a human being with needs. The young servant boy, the one who nearly got Gordis sitting on a log with his head between his knees, either trying not to vomit or trying not to cry or both. One of the other servants mutters something to him, probably along the lines of, "Get up before someone notices you're weak." And the boy forces himself to stand, his face pale under the dirt and scratches. He's learned an important lesson today. Being vulnerable is dangerous. Showing fear is dangerous. And the only thing more dangerous than the wildlife is appearing unable to continue. Godric materializes beside you and takes the organ bag without comment, tying it closed and hanging it from a porter's pack frame. Right? He announces to the hunting party at large. That's the morning's work done. His lordship wants deer for tonight's feast. We move to the oak grove where the herd beds down. Your internal groan must be visible on your face because what catches your eye and makes a gesture that's somewhere between sympathy and mockery. Thought we were done after one animal? He asks quietly. That boar was just the warm-up. Nobles don't drag themselves out to the forest for a single kill. We'll be hunting until dark. Probably bag 2 or 3 deer, maybe some rabbits if we're lucky, and then we get to carry everything back to the castle. The oak grove is apparently 2 miles away, which doesn't sound terrible until you remember that medieval miles are vague concepts and 2 miles through trackless forest while exhausted and hungry is approximately equivalent to 10 normal miles. Also, your feet are still wet from the stream crossing, your shoes are disintegrating, and you're pretty sure you've got blisters on your blisters at this point. The party regroups and moves out, falling into that same loose formation as before nobles on horseback where terrain permits, professional huntsmen ranging ahead to scout, servants scattered throughout to carry equipment and manage dogs and generally suffer. The forest has shifted character. You're moving away from the dense undergrowth and steep hills into older woodland dominated by massive oak trees. These are ancient specimens, some of them probably several hundred years old. Their trunks so wide that 3 people holding hands couldn't encircle them. The canopy here is thick enough that the understory is relatively clear, not easy walking by any means, but easier than the thornbush maze you were navigating earlier. Red deer live in these forests in large numbers. They're impressive animals. The stags can weigh 400 pounds or more, with antlers that span 4 feet and can genuinely kill a person if they connect right. Unlike the boar, which was pure aggression and rage, deer are flight animals that will run first and fight only when cornered. But a cornered stag is every bit as dangerous as a boar, maybe more so because people tend to underestimate deer. They see the elegant animal from fairy tales and forget that those antlers are weapons honed by evolution and used in brutal mating season battles between males. The hunt for deer is different from the boar hunt. More patient. The limers are brought forward, again different dogs this time. Fresh ones who haven't been exhausted by the morning's chase. These hounds are trained specifically for tracking deer, able to distinguish between the scents of different animals, different ages, even different genders. The ideal quarry is a mature stag, big enough to be impressive and provide plenty of meat, but not so old that the meat is tough. Finding this perfect specimen requires skill and knowledge that the professional huntsmen have developed over decades. You're not handling dogs this time, thank God. Instead, you've been assigned to the beating crew, which sounds less demanding but is actually worse in different ways. Beaters are the people who spread out through the forest and drive game toward the hunters. You walk through the undergrowth making noise, waving your arms, banging sticks together, basically being as obnoxious as possible to scare animals into fleeing toward the killing zone where the nobles wait with their weapons ready. This requires walking through the absolute worst terrain. Not the convenient paths that the mounted nobles use, but the dense undergrowth, the thorny thickets, the marshy spots where every step sinks 6 inches into cold mud. You're wading through ferns that come up to your waist, pushing through bushes that grab at your clothes, stepping over and around obstacles while trying to maintain a rough line with the other beaters spread out to your left and right. And here's the thing nobody mentions about being a beater. You don't just scare the deer. You scare everything. You flush rabbits from cover, sending them bolting away in panic. You startle foxes from their dens. You disturb wild cats, not cute house cats, but European wildcats that are genuinely aggressive and will absolutely claw your face off if cornered. You send up clouds of birds, disturb badgers, and on at least one occasion, you stumble across a snake coiled in a sunny patch, which sends you stumbling backwards so fast you nearly fall into a thorn bush. The snake probably just a grass snake. Harmless slithers away into the undergrowth. But your heart is hammering again because medieval people absolutely believed in the danger of serpents. Not just physical danger, but spiritual danger. Snakes were associated with the devil, with sin, with temptation and fall from grace. Never mind that most European snakes are completely harmless, the cultural conditioning runs deep. Plus there are adders, which are venomous, and trying to tell the difference between a grass snake and an adder when you're exhausted and scared and it's moving fast through leaf litter is basically impossible. The beating line moves forward slowly, maybe a mile per hour, making constant noise. Your throat is getting sore from shouting. Your arms ache from waving your stick. And you're developing a comprehensive understanding of just how many different types of plants have evolved thorns, spines, or irritating hairs as defense mechanisms. You've got dozens of small puncture wounds on your hands and forearms. Your legs are scratched to hell through your wool hose, and you're pretty sure something, maybe nettle, maybe something else entirely, has given you a rash that's starting to itch intensely. A horn sounds from ahead, the signal that the limers have found the herd's bedding area. The beaters are supposed to increase the pressure now, really driving hard to push the deer toward the hunters. You're crashing through undergrowth, making as much noise as possible, and suddenly there's movement, a heat, a flash of tawny brown, the white flash of a deer's rump as it flees. Then more deer, a whole group of them, maybe 20 animals, exploding from their resting places and bounding away through the forest. They move with that characteristic deer gait, powerful leaps that cover 10 feet or more, their white tails raised like flags. It's actually beautiful for about 2 seconds before you remember that you need to keep pushing forward, keep driving them toward the killing zone. The problem with being a beater is that you're often closer to the fleeing animals than the hunters are. You're right there when the deer break cover, and deer in a panic don't always run in predictable directions. One young stag, confused by the noise and chaos, runs directly at your section of the beating line. You and the servant to your left both dive sideways, and the stag thunders past between you, close enough that you could have touched him if you'd been stupid enough to try. Up ahead, you hear shouts, the twang of bowstrings, the baying of dogs released to pursue the fleeing herd. The hunt is on, and now you're supposed to chase after it, because apparently being a beater doesn't end when the game is flecheterie, also part of the pursuit. Though of course you're on foot while the nobles are mounted, so you're automatically falling behind. You're running again, or trying to run, though run is a generous term for what you're actually doing. More like aggressive stumbling forward while breathing hard and trying not to pass out. The forest blurs around you. Your vision is narrowing to a tunnel, not a good sign. Suggests you're approaching exhaustion or dehydration or both. When did you last drink water? You honestly can't remember. Maybe at the stream crossing, though that water was probably full of parasites and you'll be dealing with dysentery next week. Assuming you survive today, the sounds of the hunt echo through the trees, directional clarity lost in the acoustic maze of the forest. You're following sounds, following trampled undergrowth, following the occasional glimpse of other servants ahead of you. Your sense of direction is completely gone. If the hunting party disappeared right now, you'd be lost until you died or stumbled onto a road by pure luck. You round a massive oak and nearly collide with the young boy, who stopped, staring at something on the ground. It's one of the deer, a doe, struck by an arrow that caught her in the haunch. She's not dead, not even close, but she can't run anymore. The arrow has damaged something in her leg, and she's trying to flee but just going in circles, her eyes rolling with fear and pain, her breath coming in gasps. The boy is frozen, and you understand why. This is the reality behind the sport, a terrified animal in agony, dying slowly, and you're supposed to, what? Finish her off? You don't have a weapon. Wait for a huntsman? She could be suffering for minutes, hours even. The merciful thing would be to end it quickly, but you don't have the tools or knowledge to do that humanely. Godric appears, reading the situation instantly. He draws a long knife from his belt and moves to the doe with practiced efficiency. One quick thrust to the throat, severing the major vessels, and the doe's struggles slow, then stop. It's over in seconds, as humane as medieval hunting ever gets, which isn't very humane, but at least it's quick. Mark the spot. Godric tells you curtly. We'll send a porter back to collect her once the main chase is done. He's already moving on, following the sounds of the hunt, leaving you and the boy standing over the dead animal. The boy looks like he might be sick. This might be his first hunt, his first time seeing an animal killed up close. The poetry and songs about hunting never mention this part, the messy reality of death. The blood soaking into the forest floor. The way the doe's eye is still open, reflecting nothing now. Come on, you tell him, trying to sound more confident than you feel. You break a branch from a nearby tree and wedge it upright in the ground near the carcass, a marker that the porters can find later. We need to catch up. But you're not catching up. The hunting party is pulling farther ahead, and you're exhausted, and honestly you're not entirely sure which direction they went anymore. The sounds are fainter now, might be coming from multiple directions as the hunt spreads out through the forest. This is how people die in medieval forests. Not dramatically, not in combat with wild animals or bandits, but through simple exhaustion and disorientation. You sit down to rest for just a minute, then you can't get up, or you pick the wrong direction and wander deeper into the wilderness. Or night falls and the temperature drops and your wet clothes become a death sentence. You're about to suggest to the boy that you both need to move. Now, when you hear something that makes your blood freeze, it's not a deer, it's not a boar, it's not the hunting party. It's human voices, multiple people, speaking quietly, and they're definitely not part of Lord Edmund's company. They're coming from somewhere to your left, maybe 50 yards away, concealed by the forest. Historians still argue whether medieval forests were as dangerous as popular accounts suggest, or whether the threat of bandits and outlaws was exaggerated by chroniclers who rarely ventured into the actual wilderness. But right now, listening to those hidden voices, you're pretty confident the danger was real. The boy hears them too. His eyes go wide, and he looks to you for guidance, as if you have any idea what to do in this situation. The sport has officially become survival. You press a finger to your lips, signaling the boy to stay absolutely silent, and for once someone listens to you without argument. The voices are getting clearer now, 3, maybe 4 distinct speakers, male, talking in low tones that carry through the forest in that weird way sound travels through trees. You can't make out words yet, but the tone is conversational, unhurried. These aren't people running from something or hunting something. They're just here, in the forest, where they probably shouldn't be. The boy is trembling, whether from fear or exhaustion or cold you can't tell. Your own hands aren't exactly steady either. Medieval forests were genuinely lawless spaces, in many ways too vast to patrol effectively, too difficult to traverse for systematic enforcement of royal authority. The forest laws were supposed to regulate everything, but enforcing laws across thousands of acres of unmarked wilderness with a limited number of foresters was essentially impossible. People lived in these forests, worked in them, hid in them, and sometimes preyed on travelers passing through them. You motion for the boy to crouch lower, behind a fallen log that's become home to about 17 different types of moss and fungus. The dead doe is maybe 10 feet away, her blood still fresh, and you have the horrible thought that these mysterious voices might be drawn by the smell. Blood attracts scavengers, human and otherwise. The voices are moving closer. You can make out some words now, though the accent is thick, possibly a dialect you're not familiar with. 3 days yet. One voice says, Too many of them, says another. They're speaking English, or at least the medieval version of it, that varies wildly by region, but the words are spaced oddly. Half swallowed, mixed with terms you don't recognize. Then you see them. For men, moving through the trees with the practiced ease of people who spend significant time in forests. They're dressed in rough wool and leather, their clothes stained and patched, their boots wrapped in cloth and bound with cord. One carries a bow, not a noble's hunting bow, but a self-bow, probably made by hand from whatever wood was available. Another has a spear, crude but functional. The other two have knives at their belts and are carrying what looks like a dead rabbit between them. Poachers. Definitely poachers. Or possibly outlaws. Or possibly just charcoal burners or woodsmen who happen to be in this part of the forest. But the way they're moving, constantly scanning, staying to cover, suggests they're doing something they shouldn't be doing, and they really don't want to be discovered. The problem is that you and the boy are between them and the dead doe, and any second now they're going to spot either you or the deer. Your mind races through options. Reveal yourself and hope they're friendly? Stay hidden and pray they pass by? Run and risk drawing attention? Every option seems terrible. The decision is taken out of your hands when the boy sneezes. It's not even a loud sneeze, more of a stifled, almost silent attempt, but in the relative quiet of the forest it might as well be a trumpet blast. All four men freeze instantly, their heads swinging toward your hiding spot like predators catching a scent. Who's there? One of them calls out, his hand moving to his knife. Show yourself. You stand up slowly, hands visible and empty, trying to look as non-threatening as possible, which isn't difficult because you're exhausted, unarmed, and honestly ready to collapse. The boy stands with you, his face white with fear. The four men approach cautiously, spreading out slightly, a tactical formation that suggests they've done this before. Close, they're weathered and hard-looking, the kind of people who've lived rough lives and developed the survival instincts to match. The one with the bow keeps it unstrung but ready. The one with the spear holds it casually, but you notice how his grip allows for quick adjustment to a defensive position. Hunting party, you say quickly, before anyone can draw wrong conclusions. We're with Lord Edmund's company. Got separated during the deer chase. You're gambling that invoking a noble's name will provide some protection. Most people, even outlaws, think twice about attacking someone connected to aristocracy because the reprisals can be brutal and far-reaching. The men exchange glances, communicating something without words. Finally, the oldest one, probably mid-40s but looking 60 from hard living, speaks. Lord Edmund's hunting in the oak grove today. Is he? It's not really a question. We heard the horns. Been keeping well clear. There's a long, uncomfortable silence. You're both assessing each other, trying to figure out threat levels and intentions. They've obviously been poaching. The rabbit they're carrying is evidence enough, but you're in no position to report them, and they know it. You're lost, separated from your party, vulnerable. They could kill you both, hide the bodies, and nobody would find you for days, if ever. We won't say anything, you offer, the words coming out before you've fully thought them through. About the rabbit, about you being here. We're just trying to find our way back to the hunting party. The oldest man studies you for a long moment. Then his face cracks into something that might be a smile if smiles could look cynical and world-weary. Of course you won't say anything, because you're going to be too busy explaining to your lord how you got lost and let a boy nearly die in the woods. He gestures in a direction that might be north or might be west. You've lost all sense of orientation. Your party's that way, maybe half a mile. Follow the sound of the horns when they blow next. And for God's sake, boy. He addresses the young servant. Learn to breathe through your mouth in the woods. Nose gives you away every time. They're leaving, melting back into the forest, and you're so relieved you could cry. But then the oldest one pauses and looks back. Word of advice. Friend, the nobles hunt for sport. We hunt to eat. Don't get those confused, or you'll end up as dead as that doe yonder. He nods toward the dead deer you'd marked earlier. And tell your lord that if he keeps pushing his hunts into the deep wood, he's gonna find things out here that don't run away. It's a threat, or a warning, or possibly just an observation. Before you can respond, they're gone, disappeared into the undergrowth with barely a sound. You and the boy stand there for a moment, processing what just happened. Then, without discussion, you both start moving in the direction the poacher indicated, walking quickly, putting distance between yourselves and that encounter. Your heart is still racing, the adrenaline of potential violence mixing with the exhaustion of the day's exertions. A horn sounds in the distance, the hunting party signaling something to each other. You adjust your course toward the sound, moving as fast as your battered feet will carry you. The forest is playing tricks on your tired mind now. Every shadow looks like a person. Every snap of a twig sounds like footsteps. You're jumping at nothing, your nerves frayed beyond their breaking point. You break through a line of trees and suddenly you're back with the hunting party, or at least part of it. Several servants are gathered around another dead deer, a young stag this time, with antlers just starting to branch. Nobody seems to have noticed you were gone, or if they did, they don't care enough to comment. You and the boy simply fold back into the group like you never left, and the hunt continues. The afternoon blurs into a series of increasingly exhausting pursuits. Another deer is brought down, this one after a chase that leads the party across a stream, up a rocky hillside, and through a section of forest so dense that even the mounted nobles have to dismount and lead their horses. You're beyond tired now, operating on pure stubborn refusal to collapse. Your feet are bleeding inside your disintegrating shoes. Your hands are torn and blistered. Your clothes are soaked with a mixture of stream water, sweat, bloodsome yours, some animal and various plant fluids from the countless thorns and stems you've pushed through. The sun is starting to sink toward the horizon when Lord Edmund finally calls a halt to the hunting. By this point, the party has killed 2 boar, the morning's big one and a smaller female caught during the afternoon, and 4 deer of various sizes. It's an impressive haul, the kind of success that will be talked about and embellished in the castle hall for weeks. Lord Edmund is in excellent spirits, flushed with wine and exercise and the particular satisfaction that comes from killing things successfully. And now comes the feast, or rather, what passes for a feast in the field. The hunting party gathers in a large clearing where someone, probably servants who went ahead earlier, has prepared a fire and set up a rough camp. There are no tents, no elaborate structures, just cleared ground and the fire and some logs arranged as seating. The reality of medieval feasts in the field is very different from the elaborate affairs in castle halls. This is rough, functional, focused on demonstrating social hierarchy as much as consuming food. The deer are being butchered more thoroughly now, not just field-dressed but actually broken down into cuts. The choicest portions, the haunches, the loins, the tender loinsair set aside. These are loaded onto spits and positioned over the fire, where they'll roast slowly while everyone waits. The smell of cooking meat fills the clearing, and your stomach cramps so hard you actually double over for a moment. You haven't eaten in approximately 16 hours. Your body is running on nothing but suffering and stubbornness. The nobles arrange themselves near the fire in a carefully structured semicircle that reflects their relative status. Lord Edmund sits closest, naturally, in what passes for the seat of honor, a log that's been covered with a cloak to protect his expensive clothes from the bark. His sons and the visiting baron sit to either side. The bishop, who's been remarkably comfortable participating in blood sport all day, settles in with a sigh that suggests even holy men enjoy the feeling of finally sitting down after hours of hunting. The professional huntsmen form a second tier, sitting or standing at a respectful distance from the nobles but closer than the servants. They're the skilled workers, the necessary experts, and they rate some acknowledgement of their importance. Godric is deep in conversation with one of the other senior huntsmen, probably discussing the day's events, critiquing techniques, planning future hunts. And then there's everyone else. You and What and the boy and the other 24 servants who've spent the entire day making this possible. You're arranged in loose clusters at the edges of the clearing, as far from the fire as you can be while still technically being part of the gathering. Nobody offers you a seat. Nobody offers you anything. You simply exist in proximity to the feast, watching it happen, smelling the cooking meat, and waiting. Here's a fun quirk of medieval feast culture that really highlights the social divisions. There were specific rules about who got what parts of the animal. The distribution wasn't random, it was codified, ritualized, practically sacred. In a formal hunt feast, there were actual ceremonies for presenting the heart and liver to the highest-ranking noble. The haunches went to knights. The shoulders went to esquires. The ribs and sides got divided among the professional huntsmen. And the servants? Servants got whatever was left after everyone else had taken their portions. But even that doesn't capture the full picture. It's not just what you eat, it's when you eat it. The nobles eat first. Obviously, they take their time, enjoying the freshly roasted meat at its best, drinking wine, telling stories, laughing. Then the professional huntsmen eat, served the cuts that were designated for their status level. And then, after everyone important has eaten their fill and the fire has died down from roasting height to smoldering coals and the meat has gone from perfectly cooked to lukewarm, then the servants get fed. You watch this unfold over the next 2 hours. 2 hours. Standing at the edge of the clearing, smelling the cooking meat, listening to your stomach growl and cramp, watching nobles eat and drink and celebrate while you're forbidden from even approaching the food. The young boy looks like he's about to cry again. What has the 1,000-yard stare of someone who's been through this before and knows there's no point in hoping it will be different this time. Finally, of the senior huntsman gestures toward the servants' area. Fetch your portions. He calls out, and there's a stampede. Not literally, because nobody has the energy for an actual stampede, but definitely an urgent shuffle as 24 exhausted, starving people move toward the remnants of the feast. What's left isn't pretty. The nobles took the best cuts. Obviously, the haunches are gone. The tenderloins vanished. The choice portions consumed hours ago when they were still hot and juicy. What remains are the bits that require more effort than they're worth for people who have options: neck meat full of tendons, ribs that have already been gnawed over, bits of shoulder and flank that are tough and sinewy. There's also offal that wasn't deemed suitable for noble consumption. Lungs, kidneys, bits of intestine that survived the initial field dressing. And all of it is cold now, or at best lukewarm, the fat congealed into white deposits that look deeply unappetizing. You grab what you can, a chunk of rib meat still clinging to bone, some unidentifiable organ that might be kidney or spleen, and a heel of bread that someone apparently brought and nobody important wanted. The bread is hard enough to use as a weapon, but it's calories, and right now you'd eat tree bark if someone assured you it was edible. You find a spot away from the crowd and tear into the food with the desperation of someone who's genuinely forgotten what satiation feels like. The meat is tough and cold and gamey, with that distinctive wild flavor that comes from animals that actually had to work for their survival. It's nothing like the domestic meat you might be familiar with: sheep and pigs raised in pens, fed on grain, their meat tender and mild. This is muscle that propelled a deer through miles of forest. Meat that's lean and dense and requires serious chewing. Your jaw aches after the first few bites, but you keep eating because stopping means staying hungry, and you've learned today that hunger is just one more discomfort you have to endure. The bread requires a strategy. You can't just bite into it, it'll break your teeth. Instead, you have to let it sit in your mouth, slowly softening with saliva, breaking down into something approaching chewable. Tastes like it was made last week, which it probably was, and there's a faint taste of mold that suggests it's been stored somewhere damp. But it's food, and you're grateful for it in a way you've never been grateful for food before. Around you, the other servants are eating with the same desperate efficiency. Nobody talks. There's nothing to say. This is survival, not a social occasion. The young boy is gnawing on a bone, trying to extract every possible bit of nutrition from the remaining scraps of meat and marrow. What has claimed an entire deer's foothooves and is working on it methodically, separating the small amount of meat from the tendons and connective tissue with practiced efficiency. Here's something historians debate. How often did medieval peasants actually eat meat? The answer varies wildly depending on region, time period, social status, and dozens of other factors. Some estimates suggest peasants ate meat only a few times a year, at festivals or special occasions. Others argue that hunting, fishing, and keeping small animals for food meant protein was more common than we think. But one thing seems certain. When peasants did eat meat, they ate all of it. Nothing was wasted. The cuts nobles turned their noses up at were delicacies to people who couldn't afford to be picky. Your portion disappears in minutes. You're still hungry, the kind of deep, persistent hunger that a few scraps of cold meat can't possibly satisfy, but at least the desperate edge is gone. Your stomach has stopped cramping, and you can think about something other than food for the first time in hours. That's when you notice the scratch on your hand. It's small, barely an inch long, just above your wrist where a thorn or sharp branch must have caught you at some point during the day. You've got dozens of similar scratches all over your body, but this one looks different. The skin around it is reddened and slightly swollen, tender to the touch. It's infected. Already, after less than a day. Medieval medicine understood infections in the vaguest possible sense. They knew wounds could go bad, that redness and swelling and heat were dangerous signs, that sometimes people died from injuries that seemed minor. What they didn't understand was germ theory, bacteria, the microscopic organisms that cause infections. Their explanations involved miasma-bad error imbalances in the body's humors, or punishment for sin. Their treatments were a mixture of folk wisdom, religious ritual, and procedures that ranged from might actually help to will definitely make things worse. You show the scratch to what? Because he seems like someone who's survived enough to maybe know something useful. He squints at it in the fading light, prods it with a finger that's probably carrying 17 different types of bacteria, and grunts. Wash it when you can. Piss on it if there's no clean water. Keep an eye on it if red streaks start climbing up your arm. You've got about a day before you're dead. This is not reassuring, but it's also probably accurate. Blood poisoning, what we'd now call sepsis, was a common killer in medieval times. A tiny scratch, treated wrong or just unlucky, could lead to infection spreading through the bloodstream. Without antibiotics, without proper antiseptics, without even a basic understanding of sterilization, people died from minor wounds all the time. The fact that anyone survived the medieval period seems almost miraculous when you consider the constant exposure to infection opportunities. The clearing has settled into that post-meal lull where people are too tired to do much but not yet ready to face the journey home. The fire has burned down to coals, providing warmth without much light. The sun has set completely now, and the forest darkness is creeping in at the edges of the clearing. Not the comfortable darkness of a modern environment with streetlights nearby, but genuine medieval darkness. The kind of darkness that's so complete you can't see your hand in front of your face. The kind of darkness that makes you understand why people were terrified of night. Lord Edmund is holding court near the remains of the fire, telling an embellished version of the boar hunt where his role becomes more heroic and the danger becomes more extreme with each retelling. His audience, the other nobles and senior huntsmen-law, at the appropriate moments and offer congratulations on his prowess. It's performance as much as conversation, reinforcing his position through narrative. You're desperately hoping someone will announce it's time to head back to the castle, but that's not happening. Instead, one of the servants starts distributing torches, pine branches wrapped in cloth and soaked in pitch, ready to be lit. Your heart sinks as you realize what this means. They're planning to hunt at night. Night hunting was actually a thing in medieval times, though it was controversial. Some people loved the excitement of pursuing game by torchlight, the way deer eyes reflected light and made them easier to spot, the different sounds and dynamics of nighttime forest. Others thought it was unnecessarily dangerous, and they were right. Everything that's hazardous about medieval hunting becomes exponentially more dangerous when you can't see more than 10 feet in any direction. But nobles didn't always make decisions based on safety. Sometimes they made decisions based on showing off, on pushing boundaries, on proving their courage by doing things that scared other people. And Lord Edmund, flushed with wine and success and the adulation of his companions, has apparently decided that the day's hunting wasn't quite enough. He wants more. We'll try for one more stag, he announces. A night hunt. The moon's nearly full. We'll have enough light. Godric, prepare the hounds. Godric looks like he wants to object but knows better. You can see the calculation on his face, weighing the danger against the consequences of refusing a noble's direct command. The danger wins by a slim margin. My lord, he says carefully, night hunting is treacherous. The forest changes in darkness. The risks are what make it exciting. Lord Edmund cuts him off, laughing. Come now, Godric. Where's your spirit of adventure? We'll stay to the established trails. Keep the party tight. What could go wrong? This is the kind of question that deserves a list, but nobody's offering one. The professional huntsmen exchange glances that communicate volumes of unspoken doubt, but they're already moving to prepare for the hunt. Dogs are being readied, torches are being lit, equipment is being redistributed. The machine is in motion, and there's no stopping it. You catch what's eye, and his expression says everything you need to know. This is a terrible idea. We're all going to regret it, but we don't have a choice. The nobles want their night hunt, so we're having a night hunt, and if anyone dies or gets seriously injured, well, that's just the price of entertainment. The torches are distributed not to everyone, of course, because torches require pitch and cloth and preparation, all of which cost money. The nobles each get a torch, or rather a servant carrying a torch to walk beside them. The professional huntsmen get torches, and the rest of you share what's left, which means maybe one torch per 4 or 5 servants. You're grouped with what? The young boy, and 2 other servants you haven't really talked to, a middle-aged man with a pronounced limp and a younger guy who's been coughing all day. A wet, rattling cough that suggests his lungs are not in great shape. The torches are lit from the fire, and suddenly the clearing is transformed into something from a nightmare. The flames cast wild, dancing shadows that make everything look distorted and strange. Faces become masks, half-lit and grotesque. The forest beyond the torchlight becomes a wall of absolute darkness, impenetrable and menacing, and you're about to walk into that darkness, tired and injured and increasingly certain that this is how you die. But there's no option to refuse. Servants don't refuse. Servants do what they're told, when they're told, without complaint or hesitation. The fact that you're exhausted and hurt and terrified is irrelevant. The fact that your infected scratch is throbbing and your feet are bleeding and you can barely keep your eyes open doesn't matter. Lord Edmund wants his night hunt, so you're going night hunting. The party forms up again, but the formation is different now. Tighter, bunched around the limited circles of torchlight. The darkness presses in on all sides, and the forest sounds have changed. During the day, the forest was full of bird calls and wind in the leaves and the general ambient noise of diurnal life. At night, it's different, quieter in some ways, but with strange noises that carry through the darkness, animal calls you can't identify, rustling in the undergrowth that might be wind or might be predators, the occasional crack of a branch that sounds far too loud and far too deliberate to be natural. Medieval people had a very different relationship with darkness than we do. There were no streetlights, no flashlights, no way to banish the night except with fire, which requires constant fuel and attention. Darkness meant danger. Criminals operated under cover of night. Wild animals hunted at night. Getting lost in the dark could mean death from exposure or falling into a ravine or wandering into a bog. And beyond the practical dangers, there was the supernatural fear. Medieval people genuinely believed that night was when demons and evil spirits were most active, when the boundaries between the natural and supernatural became thin. You're walking through that darkness now, one hand on one's shoulder to keep from getting separated, watching the small circle of torchlight that defines your entire visible world. Everything beyond that circle is speculation and fear. The dogs are quieter than during the day, their handlers keeping them on tight leashes. Even the nobles have stopped their boisterous conversation. Everyone can feel the forest at night is not the same place as the forest during the day. And somewhere in that darkness, you're supposed to find and kill a deer, assuming something doesn't find and kill you first. The torchlight creates a bubble of flickering orange reality in an ocean of black uncertainty. You're walking in a tight cluster now, close enough that you can smell the fierce sweat of the people around you mixing with the pine pitch smoke from the torches. The forest at night doesn't just look different, it sounds different, smells different, feels different against your skin. The temperature has dropped significantly with the sunset, and your still damp clothes are no longer just uncomfortable theory, actually dangerous, leaching heat from your body with every step. Your teeth start chattering within 10 minutes of leaving the clearing. It's not even that cold by objective standards, probably around 45 or 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but when you're exhausted, wet, and haven't eaten a proper meal in nearly 24 hours, your body's ability to regulate temperature is compromised. The other servants are in similar condition. The young boy's lips are turning blue, what keeps his jaw clenched tight, but you can see the shivers running through his frame. The man with the limp is coughing now too, his breath coming in wheezing rattles that echo the younger guy's lung problems. But the nobles are fine. Of course they are. They're wearing wool that's actually been properly cleaned and treated. They have leather gloves and boots that keep out the damp. Several of them are wearing fur-lined cloaks, fox or rabbit or even ermine for the highest rank at that provide genuine warmth. And if they get truly uncomfortable, they can just call off the hunt and return to the castle where heated rooms and dry clothes await. You don't have that option. You endure until someone with authority says you can stop enduring. The hunting dogs are behaving strangely. The limers who were so eager and energetic during the day are now hesitant, constantly looking over their shoulders, their ears swiveling to track sounds you can't hear. One of them, you think it's Holdfast, but all the dogs look similar in the uncertain torchlight, keeps whining, a high-pitched sound of distress that his handler keeps trying to silence with sharp tugs on the leash and hissed commands. The other dogs take up the whining sporadically, creating a chorus of unease that does absolutely nothing to calm anyone's nerves. Animals know things humans don't. That's not superstition, it's observation refined over thousands of years. Dogs can hear frequencies we can't perceive, smell things we'd never notice, sense changes in air pressure and electromagnetic fields that our blunted senses miss entirely. When dogs are scared, there's usually a reason, even if that reason isn't immediately apparent to the humans around them. They smell wolf, what mutters beside you, his voice barely audible over the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional crackle of torch flames. Or bear, something big enough to make them nervous. Wolves were still common in medieval England, though their numbers were declining due to aggressive hunting by humans who viewed them as competition and threat. A wolf pack could absolutely take down a deer, and they could also take down a human if they were hungry enough or desperate enough or just in the wrong mood. Bears were less common but not unheard of. Brown bears, smaller than the massive grizzlies of North America but still apex predators that demanded respect and fear. The thought of encountering either predator in the dark, with limited visibility and questionable weapons, makes your already churning stomach clench even tighter. You've survived boar charges and getting lost and potential bandits and infection and exhaustion, but wolves or bears add a whole new dimension of terror. Those animals hunt in darkness. They're built for it. You're not. Lord Edmund seems oblivious to the dog's distress, or maybe he just doesn't care. He's riding at the front of the column, his torchbearer beside him, peering into the darkness like he's expecting deer to simply materialize for his convenience. Godric is closer to the dogs, reading their behavior with the trained eye of someone who spent decades working with hounds, and his expression suggests he's reached the same conclusion as what? There's something out there that the dogs don't like. The forest path, and it is barely a path. Just a slightly less dense corridor through the trees winds between massive oaks, whose branches overhead form a canopy so thick that even the moonlight, which what assures you is nearly full tonight, can't penetrate. The torchlight catches on something reflective ahead and everyone freezes. Weapons coming up, dogs going silent and tense. For a long moment, nobody breathes. Then whatever it was, probably just dew on a spider web or the eyes of some small nocturnal creature, disappears, and the column moves forward again. Here's a quirky fact about medieval night hunting that you're experiencing firsthand. The primary technique involves something called stalking at the moon. Hunters would position themselves so the moon was behind them, silhouetting any animals against the lighter sky while keeping the hunters in relative darkness. It required clear skies, a bright moon, and open terrain, none of which you currently have. The canopy is too dense, the paths too narrow, and honestly the moon could be a blazing searchlight and you'd still barely see 10 feet ahead through this tangle of trees. But nobles didn't always hunt efficiently. Sometimes they hunted to prove points, to demonstrate courage, to create stories they could tell later. Lord Edmund is creating a story right now. Whether it's a story of glorious triumph or tragic disaster remains to be seen. A horn sounds from somewhere ahead, one of the scouts signaling that they found something. The column adjusts course, moving toward the sound, and you're stumbling over roots and rocks that are completely invisible in the darkness beyond the torch's reach. You trip, catch yourself on what's shoulder. Keep moving because stopping means getting left behind. And getting left behind in this darkness means dying alone and lost while things that hunt at night circle closer. The scouts have found tracks, fresh deer tracks, impressed into soft earth near a small stream that gurgles invisibly somewhere to your left. Godric examines them by torchlight, running his fingers over the indentations, and nods. Stag. He confirms. Big one. Passed through here within the hour. Lord Edmund's face lights up with excitement that looks almost manic in the flickering shadows. Excellent. Release the hounds. We'll run him down. My lord. Godric tries again. In the dark. On uncertain terrain. Are we huntsmen or cowards? Lord Edmund snaps, his good humor evaporating. Release the hounds. That's an order. The dogs are unleashed, and they surge forward into the darkness with voices that echo through the forest like something from hell's own kennels. The baying and howling bounces off trees, distorts through the night air, comes back from multiple directions until it sounds like there are 50 dogs instead of 15. And the hunting party follows, plunging into the darkness, torches bobbing like drunken fireflies, everyone suddenly running or trying to run over terrain they can't see. This is insanity. Absolute, complete insanity. You're running through a medieval forest in near total darkness, following sounds that could be coming from anywhere, with no idea what you're running toward or what might be running toward you. Your foot hits something, a root, a rock, a hole, and you go down hard, slamming into the ground with enough force to knock the wind out of you. The scratch on your hand, already infected, tears open wider as you catch yourself. Pain lances up your arm, sharp and hot and definitely not good. What hauls you up by your other arm? Move! He shouts over the chaos of dogs and horns and shouting humans. Move or get left. You move. Your lungs are burning. Your legs are screaming. Your vision is starting to blur at the edges, whether from exhaustion or the beginnings of shock from the infection. You're not sure. The torch your group is sharing has fallen behind, its bearer unable to keep up, and now you're running in near total darkness, following sounds and faith and the vague lighter patches between trees that might be the path or might be your mind inventing patterns in chaos. Something large crashes through the undergrowth ahead, the stag, presumably fleeing for its life. The dog's voices reach a fever pitch, that particular note that means they're closing in on quarry. More horns blow, nobles shouting to each other, trying to coordinate in the madness. And then everything happens at once. The stag breaks into what must be a clearing. You can tell because suddenly the sky is visible above. A scatter of stars and the moon that what mentioned, nearly full and bright enough to cast actual shadows. The animal is magnificent even in moonlight, a massive red deer stag with antlers that branch into at least 12 points. His coat silvered by moonlight, his breath coming in visible clouds. He's exhausted, bleeding from multiple dog bites, cornered on 3 sides by hunters and hounds. He charges, not away from danger, but toward it directly at the line of hunters. Head lowered, those antlers becoming weapons. It's a desperate move, the last gamble of an animal that knows it's going to die but refuses to die passively. One of the professional huntsmen tries to set his spear, but the stag swerves at the last second. And those antlers catch the man in the shoulder, tossing him aside like he weighs nothing. He lands with a scream that cuts off abruptly, either unconscious or too injured to continue. The dogs are on the stag immediately, dragging at his haunches, his sides, anywhere they can latch on. The stag kicks, sending one hound flying through the air to land with a yelp of pain. Another dog gets a horn through the ribs and falls, twitching. This isn't sport, Anna Marie, it's battle. Mutual combat where both sides are fighting for survival. Lord Edmund finally manages to get a spear into the stag's shoulder, a solid thrust that penetrates deep. But the stag doesn't go down. He wrenches sideways, and the spear shaft snaps, leaving the blade buried in muscle while the stag continues fighting. His blood is black in the moonlight, spattering the ground. The dogs, the humans trying to bring him down. Historians still argue whether medieval people viewed animals as creatures capable of suffering or as resources to be exploited without moral consideration. The writings are contradictory. Some sources show genuine affection and respect for animals. Others treat them as nothing more than meat on hooves. But watching the stag fight and bleed and refuse to surrender, you can't see him as just a resource. He's a living being experiencing terror and pain, and you're part of the thing causing that terror and pain. And the sick feeling in your stomach isn't just hunger and exhaustion anymore. Another spear thrust, this time to the neck, finally brings the stag down. His front legs collapse first, then his rear, and he falls to his side with a crash that seems to shake the clearing. His breathing is labored, blood frothing at his mouth and nose, his eye rolling white with fear and dying rage. It takes another full minute before his breathing stops, before the desperate heaving of his ribs goes still, before the life leaves his body and he becomes meat instead of animal. The clearing erupts in celebration, but it's muted, tired, lacking the enthusiasm of the morning's hunts. Everyone's exhausted. Several people are injured, the huntsman tossed by the antlers, at least 2 dogs seriously wounded, numerous minor injuries scattered throughout the party. and you're standing at the edge of the clearing, swaying slightly, your infected hand throbbing in time with your heartbeat, wondering how you're supposed to make it back to the castle when you can barely stand upright. The answer, turns out, is that you probably won't make it back comfortably or safely, but you'll make it back because the alternative is dying in the forest. And despite everything, you're not ready to die yet. The stag is field-dressed quickly. Nobody wants to linger in this clearing any longer than necessary. The meat is distributed among the pack animals and the strongest servants. You're assigned to carry a haunch, easily 50 pounds of dead weight that has to be balanced on your shoulder while you walk several miles back through darkness to the castle. The journey back is a nightmare that somehow surpasses all the previous nightmares of the day. You're carrying 50 pounds of deer while exhausted and injured and probably developing a fever from the infection that's definitely spreading up your arm now. You can see the red streaks what warned about, faint but visible even in torchlight. Your feet hurt so badly you've stopped feeling them as distinct anti-theory, just sources of pain at the end of your legs, obstacles that need to be forced forward repeatedly to create movement. The young boy collapses twice on the journey back. The first time, someone gets him up and keeps him moving. The second time, Godric makes the decision to have him carried, his small body draped over one of the pack horses, because even medieval huntsmen have limits to their cruelty. Apparently, the man with the limp is in worse shape, his breathing ragged, his face pale even in torchlight. But he keeps walking, because stopping means being left behind, and being left behind means death. You pass the clearing where the boar was killed this morning, which now seems like it happened years ago instead of hours. You cross the stream again, the cold water a shock that at least briefly revives your failing awareness. You climb the hill and descend the far side, your legs moving on autopilot while your mind drifts in and out of coherence. Somewhere during the final stretch, you start hallucinating, just briefly, just at the edges of vision movement that isn't there, faces in the shadows between trees, voices calling your name from the darkness. This is what exhaustion and fever do to perception, breaking down the barriers between real sensory input and the brain's pattern recognition systems that are trying desperately to make sense of insufficient data. The castle walls appear ahead like a miracle, torches on the battlements creating points of light in the darkness. You've never been so grateful to see stone and fire in your life. The hunting party struggles through the gates, a ragged column of exhausted humans and animals, and suddenly there are fresh servants rushing forward to take the game, to tend to the injured, to help the nobles dismount and retreat to their comfortable chambers. You surrender your burden, the deer haunch you've been carrying for miles, and someone points you toward the servants' quarters. You stumble in that direction, barely conscious, and collapse onto the same straw mattress you were pulled from approximately 20 hours ago. Your last thought before unconsciousness claims you is that this was one day, one single hunting party, and nobles do this for fun, repeatedly, throughout the season. You wouldn't last a week. You barely lasted a day. You wake up, if you can call it waking, when you never really achieved proper sleep, though someone shaking your shoulder and daylight streaming through gaps in the wooden walls of the servants' quarters. Your entire body has transformed into one unified mass of pain. There's no individual injury anymore, just comprehensive suffering from head to toe. Your muscles have seized up during the night, cramping into knots that scream when you try to move. Your feet feel like they've been beaten with hammers. Your hands are swollen, the blisters burst and weeping, and that infected scratch on your wrist has become a genuine medical emergency. The red streaks have climbed halfway to your elbow, and the skin around the wound is hot and swollen and leaking pus. Up, says the person shaking you, one of the castle's permanent staff, a woman who looks like she's seen this exact scenario play out dozens of times before. Lord Edmund wants another hunt this afternoon. You're to report to the stables in an hour. For a moment, you genuinely believe you've misheard. Another hunt? Today? After yesterday's nightmare? But the woman is already moving to wake the next person, and you realize with dawning horror that she's serious. Nobles hunt frequently during the season, sometimes multiple days in a row, sometimes weeks-long hunting expeditions into deep forest, staying in temporary camps, pursuing game until the season changes or they get bored or someone important dies. You try to sit up and the room spins. That's not exhaustion, that's fever. Infection spreading through your system, your body mounting an immune response that's consuming resources you don't have to spare. You need medical attention. You need rest. You need food and clean water and antibiotics that won't be invented for another 600 years. What you get is a chunk of stale bread and a dipper of small beer weak. Slightly alcoholic liquid that's safer to drink than water because the brewing process kills some of the pathogens. Though medieval people didn't understand why. You force the bread down, washing it with the beer, and your stomach cramps immediately. You might be developing dysentery from yesterday's stream water, or it might just be general intestinal distress from the trauma your body's endured. Either way, you're going to be spending quality time in the castle's latrina, basically a wooden seat over a pit in a small building that smells exactly as terrible as you'd imagine. The young boy from yesterday is in the corner of the servants' quarters, curled in a ball, not moving. You crawl over to check on him, and he's alive but barely responsive, his skin hot with fever, his breathing shallow. He needs help more than you do, but there's no help coming. Servants who can't work are servants who don't eat, and servants who don't eat eventually become former servants, either discharged to fend for themselves or buried in unmarked graves when they finally succumb. What appears beside you, looking only marginally better than you feel. He's got a black eye from some impact you don't remember seeing, and he's favoring his left leg like something's wrong with his knee or ankle. But he's upright and moving, which apparently qualifies as fit for duty in medieval labor standards. You look like death, he observes, examining your infected arm with a practiced eye. That needs to be lanced and drained. You need poultices, maybe cautery if it's really bad. You definitely shouldn't be walking around, much less going on another hunt. Do I have a choice? You ask, already knowing the answer. What snorts? Course not. None of us do. That's the whole point. He produces a filthy cloth from somewhere in his clothing and wraps it around your infected wound, tying it tight. Keep it covered, at least. Try not to get it dirty again. I know that's impossible, but try anyway. And for God's sake, if you start feeling confused or seeing things that aren't there, tell someone. Blood poisoning makes you crazy before it kills you, and I don't want you wandering off a cliff because you thought you saw an angel beckoning. This is the reality of medieval working life that never makes it into the romantic tales. There's no workers' compensation, no sick leave, no safety regulations, no concept that humans have a right to reasonable working conditions. You work while you can work, and when you can't work anymore, you're disposed of and replaced. The system doesn't care about you as an individual. You're interchangeable, expendable, valued only for your labor capacity. Some historians argue that this paints too bleak a picture, that there were communities and bonds and mutual aid networks that provided support in hard times. And that's probably true. Humans are social creatures, and people did help each other when they could. But those support networks existed despite the system, not because of it. The fundamental relationship between lords and servants was exploitative by design, and no amount of individual kindness changes that structural reality. You make your way to the stables, moving slowly, trying not to jar your protesting body more than necessary. The castle is coming alive with morning activity servants hauling water, kitchen staff preparing meals, craftsmen already at work on various maintenance projects. The smell is overwhelming: human waste from the latrines, animal waste from the stables, smoke from cooking fires, the general funk of hundreds of people living in close quarters without modern hygiene. You've been here less than 2 days and you already can't imagine spending a lifetime in this environment. At the stables, the hunting party is assembling again. Not the exact same groupsome nobles from yesterday have been replaced by different nobles who want their turn at the sport. Some servants are missing and new ones have appeared to fill the gaps. The dogs are already excited, bouncing and howling, because dogs don't hold grudges about yesterday's exhaustion. The horses are being saddled. Equipment is being distributed. You're handed the same wooden staff as yesterday, as if you accomplished anything useful with it. You're also given a coil of rope and a leather bag, and someone mutters something about helping with the catch without explaining what that means. You're just expected to figure it out as you go, learning through observation and occasional violent correction when you get it wrong. Lord Edmund appears, looking refreshed and energized, wearing different expensive clothes that are equally inappropriate for forest labor. He's laughing with one of his companions, recounting yesterday's night hunt with embellishments that make his role even more heroic and the stag even more dangerous. The huntsman who got tossed by the stag's antlers is nowhere to be seen either. He's recovering from serious injuries, or he died during the night. Either way, his absence doesn't merit comment from Lord Edmund, who's already focused on today's entertainment. The hunting party moves out through the castle gates, and you're swept along with them, one more expendable body in the machine. Your feet are bleeding again within the first mile. The brief night's rest wasn't enough for your blisters to heal, and now you're breaking open barely formed scabs with every step. Your fever is getting worse, making the morning sunlight seem too bright, making sounds echo strangely in your ears. The infection is spreading, your body losing a battle against bacteria that won't be identified or understood for centuries. But you keep walking, because what else can you do? There's no opting out, no calling in sick, no asking for reasonable accommodations. You walk because everyone else is walking, because stopping means being left behind, and being left behind means death. It's that simple and that brutal. The forest swallows the hunting party again, and the whole nightmare cycle begins anew. Dogs tracking scent, nobles riding in comfort, servants struggling to keep up and keep their assigned equipment from being lost or damaged. Hours blur together in a haze of pain and fever. You're moving on autopilot now, your conscious mind checking out because consciousness means feeling everything, and feeling everything is unbearable. At some point during the afternoon you've completely lost track of time. You realize you can't do this anymore. Not can't in the sense of difficult or unpleasant, but genuinely, physically cannot continue. Your legs won't support your weight consistently. You're stumbling every few steps, catching yourself on trees, losing balance on flat ground. The infection has spread past your elbow now, angry red lines climbing toward your shoulder, and your entire arm is swollen and hot to the touch. You stop walking and lean against a tree, just for a moment, just to catch your breath and gather your strength. The hunting party moves forward without you. Within 30 seconds, they've disappeared into the forest undergrowth, the sounds of their passage fading into the general ambient noise. You're alone again, like yesterday, except this time you don't have the energy to chase after them. This is how it ends. You realize, not dramatically, not in combat with a boar or gored by a stag, but through simple exhaustion and infection and being ground down by a system that views you as disposable. You slide down the tree trunk until you're sitting at its base, your back against rough bark, your infected arm cradled against your chest. The forest is quiet around you, just bird calls and wind in the leaves and your own labored breathing. Medieval forests were full of people who didn't make it, travelers who got lost, criminals who fled into the wilderness and couldn't survive, workers who collapsed and never got up, hunting servants who couldn't maintain the pace and were left behind. Their bones were scattered through these woods, slowly returning to the earth, their stories forgotten because nobody bothered to record the deaths of unimportant people. You're about to become one of those stories. One more forgotten casualty of a system that never valued you in the first place. But then you hear footsteps approaching heavy, deliberate, moving through the undergrowth with practiced ease. Your fever-addled mind conjures possibilities. Wolves, bandits, demons from medieval nightmares made manifest. You try to stand, to prepare for whatever's coming, but your legs won't cooperate. What appears through the trees, his face set in an expression of resigned frustration. Knew you'd fall behind, he says, not unkindly. Saw you swaying like a drunk and figured it was only a matter of time. He crouches beside you, examining your infected arm with a grimace. This is bad, really bad. You need actual medical help, not forest first aid. Can't. You manage to say through cracked lips. Hunt's not done. Lord Edmund. Fuck Lord Edmund. What says? Which is possibly the most rebellious thing you've heard anyone say in this entire nightmare. He's got 24 other servants to carry his equipment and beat his bushes. He won't miss one more. Come on. He hauls you upright, supporting most of your weight, and starts guiding you back toward the castle. Not following the hunting party, but taking a different route, a more direct path that suggests he knows these woods far better than you realized. You stumble along beside him, barely conscious, your fever climbing higher, your infected arm throbbing in time with your racing heartbeat. Why? You ask at one point. Why help me? What is quiet for a long moment, navigating around a fallen log, adjusting his grip to keep you from falling. Because someone helped me once, he finally says. Years back, my first hunt, I was in your exact position. Infected wound, fever, couldn't go on. Another servant old guy named Thomas. Been doing this for 30 years. She helped me back. Got me to someone who could treat the infection. Saved my life. Probably. Thomas died 2 years later, gored by a boar. But I remember what he did. Figure I owe it to him to keep the cycle going. This is the counterpoint to medieval brutality, the small acts of human kindness that persisted despite systemic cruelty. People helping each other not because the system encouraged it, but because humans are fundamentally social creatures who form bonds and care about others even when there's no material benefit. These acts didn't fix the system or make it less exploitative, but they made survival slightly more possible for individuals who might otherwise have been lost. The journey back takes hours. You're barely aware of most of it, drifting in and out of lucidity as fever and exhaustion battle for control of your consciousness. At some point, you're in the castle. At some point, someone examines your arm. At some point, there's incredible pain lancing, draining, cleaning the wound with wine that burns like liquid fire, and then finally, darkness that feels like falling and relief and surrender all at once. You wake up days later, 3 days. You'll learn in a corner of the servants' quarters. Your infected arm bandaged properly. The fever broken. Weak as a newborn but alive. The young boy from before didn't make it. Blood poisoning. Same as you almost had. But his infection progressed faster and nobody helped him in time. He's been buried already. His name barely remembered. His death noted in exactly 0 official records. Someone explains that you're incredibly lucky. The castle's barber surgeon, the closest thing to a medical professional available, was between procedures when what brought you in. He recognized blood poisoning immediately and treated it aggressively, using techniques passed down through generations of trial and error. The wine cleaning, the proper bandaging, the rest, the clean water and decent food, all of it combined to give your body the resources it needed to fight off the infection. But you're not fit for hunting duty anymore. Your arm needs weeks to heal properly, and you're so weakened that you can barely walk to the latrine and back. Instead, you're assigned to light duties in the castle, carrying messages, holding torches for craftsmen, basically existing as a mobile assistant for people who need an extra pair of hands for simple tasks. It's easier than hunting, infinitely easier, but you're acutely aware that this is only because you nearly died. If the infection had been slightly less severe, or if what hadn't helped you, or if the barber surgeon had been unavailable, you'd have been sent right back to the hunts as soon as you could stand upright. The system doesn't care about your well-being, it only responds to obvious, undeniable incapacity, and even then only barely. Lord Edmund's hunting continues throughout the season. You watch parties leave in the morning and return at dusk, always with fresh game, always with exhausted servants stumbling back to their quarters. Sometimes people don't come back, accidents happen. Injuries turn fatal. People get lost and never found. The castle functions as if these losses are normal and acceptable, because in medieval terms, they are. Servants are replaceable. There's always another desperate person willing to take the position, to endure the hardships, because the alternative, starvation, homelessness, death is worse. This is what you've learned. Medieval hunting wasn't sport in any modern sense. It was violence, exploitation, suffering, and death wrapped in aristocratic ritual. The nobles enjoyed themselves because their enjoyment was built on a foundation of other people's pain. The servants endured because they had no choice. The system perpetuated itself because it benefited those with power, and those with power wrote the histories and created the romantic tales that erased the reality of what hunting actually entailed. You wouldn't last a day in a medieval hunting party. You barely lasted one day, and you only survived through luck and the kindness of someone who'd been through the same nightmare before. The medieval world was brutal in ways that modern people struggle to comprehend, not because medieval people were cruel by nature, but because the social structures of the time created and normalized cruelty on a massive scale. And the worst part? This was considered normal, acceptable, just the way things were. The exploitation was so embedded in the culture that most people couldn't even imagine alternatives. This was reality, unchangeable and eternal, ordained by God and enforced by those who benefited from the arrangement. So no, you wouldn't last a day in a medieval hunting party. But more importantly, you shouldn't have to. Nobody should have to endure that level of suffering for someone else's entertainment. The fact that people did endure it, generation after generation, speaks to both the incredible resilience of the human spirit and the terrible capacity of social systems to normalize exploitation. And as you drift off to sleep in your corner of the servants' quarters, your bandaged arm aching, your body slowly rebuilding itself from near destruction, you're grateful for one thing: you don't have to do it again tomorrow. At least not tomorrow. Maybe the day after, or next week, or next season when your arm has healed and you're considered fit for duty again. The machine keeps grinding, the hunts continue, and you've learned the most important medieval lesson of all. Survival isn't about glory or heroism. It's about enduring one more day, and then another, and another, until finally either the system breaks or you do. Usually, it's the person who breaks first. The nightmare fades now, slowly dissolving like morning mist over a still lake. You're here, safe in your own time, where infections are treated with antibiotics and workers have rights and nobody forces you to chase boars through forests until you collapse from exhaustion. The medieval world recedes into history, where it belongs, remembered, studied, understood, but mercifully left behind. Your breathing slows. The tension drains from your muscles. The modern world around you, with all its own challenges and complexities, suddenly seems a little more manageable in comparison. You've walked through that medieval nightmare and emerged on the other side, carrying nothing but the knowledge of what people endured and survived. The hunt is over. The forest releases you. And finally, blessedly, you can rest. Let the centuries between now and then cushion you in comfort. Let the distance make it just a story, just a history lesson, Just a reminder of how far humanity has traveled from those dark woods. Close your eyes. The medieval hunting party can't reach you here. You're home. You're safe. You made it through. And now, at last, you can sleep. Sweet dreams.